Can map making with Dungeon Alchemist make prep easier? Alright, so there's a lot of AI tools out there, some of them alarming and some of them kind of useless. And for DMs, let me know if you want to see more of weird tools out there that we can use to run our games. But Dungeon Alchemist is not really AI, and that's kind of a loaded term. What Dungeon Alchemist really is a map maker with prefab built in. But what makes this thing special, and why should you drop the 45 bones for it? Alright, so what it does is that you can realistically generate a map with terrain based on a set of parameters, and then you can generate buildings using the tools at hand. It's really that simple, but there's a lot more to it. If you were incredibly lazy and your players didn't notice the occasional weird out-of-place objects, then yeah, you could generate like an entire session in maybe 2 or just even 1 hour, probably less. But if you want to get more specific, it gets a little complicated and there are tools to be very detailed. So let's talk about map making UI. Incarnate, for example, is incredibly popular. It's another map maker that's on the market. It's very commercially friendly and has a bit of a learning curve and requires a bit of understanding of maps. It's super utilitarian. Incarnate is built like an application for work, while Dungeon Alchemist is built more like a game. Now, this isn't instantly noticeable, but DA comes with little animations and flourishes when generating things. Plopping items have a pop and cartoon spring to them. Both the UI with the listed items and all of that are the same as Incarnate, but Incarnate treats it more like how Photoshop treats brushes, while DA kind of treats it like Gary's mod. Dungeon Alchemist has a lot of character for what it is, and for first-time map makers, it's probably going to be great for them. I think a lot of DMs will get a lot of mileage out of it just based on the level of content the community has made. As the forever DM, it's kind of a mixed bag because I run other settings than fantasy on occasion. The difference in presentation is probably the most noticeable thing. The fact that DA maps generally take longer and some have very annoying characteristics about it. Incarnate doesn't hold my hand at all, but I feel like there's a constant lag time between my item placement and these animations that slow me down with Dungeon Alchemist. I think it could just run better or need some kind of pro mode that has more granularity to it. Even if it's happening at a normal speed, my brain does feel like it's slower, and I think that's just how it's presenting it. Another thing is that AI tools, machine learning tools, whatever you want to call it, there's a lot of funky business going on when you generate a room. So you get redundant props in weird locations. Sometimes they can be in the way of the door, but usually not all the time. It's gotten very good. But you do get strange item placement and weird fixtures in the room. This is why the tool is designed to tweak the room after placement. You can switch a bath for a toilet, for example, make a great hall look less uncanny, and generally make things look more normal and inviting for the players so that way they don't go, wow, that looks weird. The best function in DA, though, is the export function, which allows all the walls and lighting to be exported to the VTT of your choice. In my case, I use Foundry. Now, one of the things that'll slow you down the most as a DM using a VTT is putting in lighting and walls. This is so time consuming, and this has been an absolute lifesaver that has made Dungeon Alchemist an absolute mainstable tool in my DMing experience. This is amazing, and I love that it bakes these things in and almost never misses. Not to mention, generally, the performance of this thing is really good. And I know that seems weird, but I've played other ones and they just don't run. There are design conventions and things like shortcuts, which you don't think are stuff that needs to be like hashed out anymore, but I've used other dungeon map maker builders and they don't have the shortcuts that Blender or any other 3D program would use, so it doesn't make any sense. Why does Chronos Builder do this? I hate this thing. It doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? It should just do the same thing that everybody else is doing. Alright, Dungeon Alchemist has a problem where things kind of feel chibi. By that I mean the designs and rooms, if you look at them really up close, which generally you should be doing orthographic. The props kind of look like squished. This is very much a user opinion thing, but even when exporting into orthographic, I can't help but feel like everything is the wrong size, and I often have to resize the room on Foundry. This is regardless of the canvas size. I could have 100 by 100 square canvas and it still feel kind of small. For example, this tavern I pulled up feels really just tiny, and not in the way that it's like a small space, but that like if I picked up an apple I could hold it in my 2 fingers. It feels like a Disney version of what a tavern in D&D should feel like. However, my players don't notice or care, so clearly this is more of a personal taste thing. Speaking of Workshop, this is probably the best thing that they've done. This has Steam Workshop integration, which is great because it means other people can do the hard work for me. Many of these maps are incredibly detailed and intricate and push what I can do with a map maker, obviously. As we look at all of these maps and just see how much work is put into it, you can tell that most of these are just done by human hand entirely, AI playing minimum to 0 roles in the map design. Workshop support is just amazing, and they've added asset support recently, which is a great change. This is going to allow the community to produce props of their own and give just free DLC that dungeon masters can use. The system does have a few weird quirks. You need to be in a room to place items on the ground, but not some items, just certain ones. You kind of get a weird labyrinthine grid space kind of deal going on, which is fine on a tabletop, but a VTT presents itself very differently. Again, it's a nitpick, probably a quirk of the AI tools, but you end up with a lot of hard-edged spaces, and for someone like me who recently wanted to create an arena, this was an issue because it had to be a square and couldn't just be a circle. I wanted a smooth transition, but it doesn't really allow for smooth transitions between room types. Regardless, the square arena still worked and my players didn't really have any qualms about it. I just felt it was a little weird looking, but hey, I had a D&D anime-esque tournament arc without any issue whatsoever, so that's pretty poggers. I think the map making tool really excels in these man-made spaces like cities, but it's a very lacking system for suburb or rural environments. I think a little less restriction would probably improve the workflow in Dungeon Alchemist. Another thing I think is important is Dungeon Alchemist needs to build a series that teaches people how to use it. YouTube tutorials, a wiki baked into Dungeon Alchemist, any of those things could help. The product is in early access though, but if the devs see this, Mana Potion Tabletop will be willing to help you do the tutorials. I have a film degree. Now, I complained about it earlier, but Dungeon Alchemist absolutely leads the pack in terms of ease of entry, fun factor, and just map making potential. Even with the AI tag attached to it, it is way better than the competition. The UI, the tool set, it's all you need to run a fantasy game, but right now, that's all you can do. It's a one-stop shop for fantasy, and if you want anything else, you gotta go to other tools that don't really work as well, or you could support people that are on Patreon. It's really up to you, but a majority of people do run fantasy settings, so it'll help smooth out that gaming process. Heck, I've had players completely run off the beaten path, and I generate a map in like 10 seconds, so that way it's just like, oh, you got to a different area. DA really needs more items, settings, and all of that, in my opinion. I think that'll really help foster a community to create more, is just giving them more tools at their disposal. Dungeon Alchemist is really just in a great spot right now. There's a lot of potential for it, and I really think they need to capitalize on their market lead compared to the other map makers that are out there. I'd like to see stuff like city map generation. Something fell. I'd like to see stuff like city map generation, regional, world, global, nations, political maps. Get me the stuff that's in Incarnate, make it a one-stop shop. It can happen, I'd love to see it happen. Overall, my players are very visual, and it made prep so much more fun for me as a DM. We've done everything from Ravenloft to Waterdeep, and you can easily cover every biome in the Sword Coast with this tool. My players love it and feel immersed, which is really the important part. So make sure to sub. Anyway, Dungeon Alchemist is like a great map making tool, and you should try it out if you got 45 bones to spend. You know, if you don't like it, there's the 2-hour refund policy on Steam. But, you know, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell, and maybe check out my review of the digital mini painting system on Steam.